The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me again remind my colleagues that what the Republicans are proposing here is that the next 3 days be dedicated to the gray wolf. We're not debating health care, we're not debating the economy or jobs or keeping the government running, but it's to this. And they bring it to us under a rule that is completely closed, so there's no amendments that are made in order. And the rule is even worse because it basically undercuts the privilege resolution introduced by Mr. Khanna so we could debate this horrific war going on in Yemen. I mean, it takes my breath away at the lengths that this majority goes through to basically deny members of Congress the right to be able to talk about important issues. And, Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the author of the privilege resolution on Yemen, the gentleman from California, Mr. Khanna.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman McGovern, for your moral leadership. I rise in strong opposition to this rule that will deny members of Congress an up or down vote about whether the United States should be complicit in the war in Yemen. Let's be very clear. This is unprecedented. In American history, never has the Speaker of the House and the majority denied a member of Congress a vote on matters of war and peace. This is basically rendering ineffectual the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act was passed in a bipartisan fashion after Vietnam because our nation said never again are we going to make the mistake of Vietnam. We're going to make sure that if a member of Congress calls for a vote, that members of Congress have the Article 1, Section 8 responsibility to vote on matters of war and peace. And what the majority is saying, that if the President of the United States and the Speaker believe we should be in war, we should be in war. It doesn't matter what members of Congress think. That's what they are doing with this rule. Now, they are arguing that we are not complicit in the hostilities of Yemen to invoke the War Powers Act. But you read every article written on this in the international press or national press, and it starts with a simple line: the U.S.-backed Saudi coalition efforts in bombing. Of course we're complicit. Do you think people in Yemen don't think we're complicit? Do you think people in the Middle East or our allies don't think we are complicit? With due respect, Congressman Newhouse says, well, why not wait? Why not wait a few weeks until we're in the majority? Congressman Newhouse, Special Envoy Griffith and every report has said that 500,000 children will die. 500,000 children will die in the matter of months. They don't have aid. They don't have nutrition. And let's be very clear on what we're doing. While we're bombing the ports of Hodeidah, we are not allowing food and aid to get to those kids. And when history is written, they're not going to say Jim McGovern did this or Khanna did this or Newhouse did this. They're going to say, how did the Congress not allow a vote while hundreds of thousands of kids were not allowed food and medicine? That's not the America that I believe in. It's not the America that so many Republican colleagues believe in. There's a reason that our founders gave Congress the power over war and peace, because we have to go and answer to our constituents. And I'll tell you something, there's not a single American who wouldn't want the violence to end and allow food and medicine to get to those kids who are going to face death if we do nothing. I plead with my Republican colleagues, please vote no on this resolution. Let's have a debate. Let's have a debate about the starvation and the killing going on there and do the right thing for our Constitution and the world. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. happy to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch.
The gentleman from Vermont is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. We know what's going on in Yemen, so none of us can escape the responsibility we have to either endorse or ignore the suffering that's occurring there. Thousands of victims in Yemen, hundreds of thousands dying of starvation, and it's happening in some cases quickly. People living in their homes under a bomb die instantly. In other cases, the suffering is prolonged, badly injured, no medical help to ease the suffering, let alone save the life. But in the case of most, it's prolonged through starvation. Children not having access to their mother's milk, not having access to aid that is in the port but is getting bombed, and it can't be delivered. That's happening every single day. The UN report says of the 28 million people in Yemen, about 20 million are in danger of humanitarian disaster. That's happening. There's no dispute that it's happening. Here's the question. Right now, that is being done with the authority of the executive branch of the United States government. It means that that suffering that's avoidable and hardly inevitable is being done in your name and in mine. Mr. Khanna has brought forth a resolution that allows us to have a debate on this floor as to whether we will condone the continuation of that policy of inflicting the loss of innocent life, women, children, citizens of Yemen. This rule prohibits us from accepting responsibility as to whether we will condone or condemn or oppose that policy. We have no justification for failing to do our job. Let us debate. This policy of Saudi Arabia of inflicting massive civilian casualty and suffering, for what? What national interest of this country is at stake by allowing that to continue? And some, including me, may say this threatens our national interest, because our national interest is to defend innocent life. It's not to kill innocent life. It's to stand with allies who are going to be honest and transparent with us as well as their own citizens. This blank check that our administration has given to Saudi Arabia for massive killing that is occurring in Yemen, or individual assassination that is occurring in Turkey,
The gentleman's recognized for additional 30.
is wrong. And the question for us is, will we accept the minimal responsibility that we have in our job to have a debate and say, no more will this be done in our name? I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to close, just to inquire as to my friend, Mr. Mcgovern, if he has any further speakers.
I'm the last speaker, so.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, undermining endangered species protections isn't a national emergency. We shouldn't be prioritizing it today. And not only is this rule a closed one, as you've heard from our side over and over and over again, Republicans took the unprecedented step of removing the privilege status of a resolution that would have given us a chance to debate the United States support of the war in Yemen. We should be voting on this. People are dying every minute in Yemen. And our silence and our inaction means that we are complicit. You know, I've always believed that the United States stands for anything. We need to stand out loud and foursquare for human rights. There was a time when the issue of human rights was a bipartisan concern. But it's clear that this administration doesn't give a damn about human rights. But that doesn't mean that this institution should follow suit. Human rights ought to be the centerpiece of our foreign policy. And there are innocent people being killed every single day. Children who are riding to school in buses, the buses have been bombed, where these children have died, have been murdered. And all my Republican friends can say, oh, you know, you could take care of that, you know, after January when you're in charge. We're just going to spend the next 3 days dedicated to the issue of gray wolves. I mean, really? There's so much real work in front of us, including our most basic responsibility of funding this government and reauthorizing programs like the National Flood Insurance Program, the Violence Against Women's Act, and the Farm Bill. I go on and on and on. Education costs are skyrocketing. Americans are afraid coverage for their pre-existing conditions will be ripped away by this administration and its allies in Congress, because you've done it, tried to do it dozens and dozens and dozens of times. How about doing something about that? It was interesting during the campaign, my Republican colleagues were rushing to every microphone they could find to say that they somehow supported covering pre-existing conditions. Let me remind everybody, and especially my Republican colleagues, that that was a Democratic idea that you opposed. This was the worst election for a Republican president since Watergate. Maybe that's why Republicans are trying to rewrite history. But here's another politically popular idea Republicans should follow: bringing an end to the most closed Congress in history. Let's let some sunlight in. Don't wait until January. Start today by voting against this closed rule and demand action on things that our constituents actually care about. And just one final note again on this unprecedented move of basically denying us the right to debate this war in Yemen. I mean, I agree with what Mr. Khanna said. History is going to look back on our inaction, not only on the war in Yemen, but on our inaction dealing with the brutality of the Saudi regime. I mean, I would thought that when we came back, that one of the first items up on the agenda would be holding the Saudi government accountable. And instead, we got nothing. And not only do we get nothing, you take the unprecedented step of denying a member of this House the right that he has under the privileges of this House to debate this issue of war. This is so wrong. It is so wrong. This is damaging to the institution, and it shows a callous disregard for what is happening in Yemen. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, do the right thing and vote against this rule. I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Washington is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to provide a closing statement for the consideration of H.R. 6784, the Manage Our Wolves Act. You know, Mr. Speaker, wolves were once hunted to near extinction in the lower 48 states. The gray wolf was listed by the federal government as an endangered species in 1974. Today, though, gray wolves are thriving, both in my state of Washington as well as throughout the United States, with more than 5,000 wolves now living in the contiguous United States.